Hello everyone! Here again. I just wanted to make a quick response video to Skallagrim on his recent video talking about the Kingston Arms Type 14 arming sword. First off, I just want to say I love Skallagrim. Keep doing all of your videos. All your content is spectacular. And to be honest, I'm not really going to disagree with anything he had to say, so it's less of a response video and more just some additional commentary. I really just wanted to add more data points for anyone who's kind of interested in this content or considering buying the sword, because I do own the sword. This is a sword that was sent to me by one of my good friends, Duzzies. Shout out to my mate down in Australia. So I've had it for a little less than a year, I think. And to be honest, it's one of my favorite swords for this kind of budget, this kind of price point and category. And when I first saw the video, I was kind of taken aback a little bit at how poorly it performed, because it's been a little while since I've cut with it. And when I first received it, it was winter time, and I had done some cutting with pumpkins from the last season, and I did not remember it being that difficult to cut with. So I wanted to go ahead and revisit it, see if my own experiences with my version of the sword kind of matched what Skall's was. Just like he discusses, I pretty much can't fault anything with the other parts of the design. The grip is great. All of the fittings are very good for this price point. The balance is very nice. The fullering is very symmetrical. It's not perfect, but for the price that you're getting it, and at the time that I would have purchased it, it would have probably been around $300 retail. The overall shape and handling, everything about it is very comfortable in the hand. And if you were looking to buy a sword like this, I could see why you'd want to consider buying this. But it does have the most concerning feature is the final sharpness on it. So I'm going to be able to just about touch this. In fact, do I have any paper? I think I have one sheet of paper. So we'll check the sharpness. Oh no, I don't want to check the sharpness on that sheet. All right, so I will check the sharpness on this sheet of paper, and we'll see. And you can see it just barely bites into this sheet of paper without really going through. I'll check it the way my buddy Kyle does it. We'll pass it through, and it just kind of makes a rather ragged tear, but doesn't go much past that. So is this typical of other swords like this? Let's compare it to other arming swords. So I have a Viking arming sword and a Chinese arming sword. Okay, these aren't other arming swords. So this is a Carolingian age, a Viking style sword. This is a Hanwei Tinker Viking sword, and this is an LK Chen magnificent. Oh, I'm sorry, Gale Wind Ming Dynasty Jian, and both of these are roughly the same weight, roughly the same type of handling, cut and thrust type of swords with rather broad blades. They of similar price points. Maybe the LK Chen is slightly more expensive. I think the Hanwei is probably the least expensive of all of them, but they're all going to be in similar categories. Not one of them's not going to be an Albion, one of them's not going to be a Depika. Let's see how they compare. If we use a little handy dandy tool I have here, I can measure. Oops. We can measure the angle. First, we'd measure the primary bevel, so the bevel that's the angle coming from the spine all the way out to the end, and then we measure the secondary bevel, which is the bevel that's put on for the final sharpness. And let's see how they compare. Magic! We've taken all the measurements. So if we look at the data collectively, you can see that all of them have pretty shallow measurements for their primary bevels going out to the edge. Now, the LK Chen has it was actually very difficult to even measure the secondary bevel on the final measurement. Trying to see where it starts on the polish of the blade is very difficult. It might only be in the very last millimeter or two, and for it to be even 18 degrees, that might be generous. It might be less. It might be something like 15 degrees, and it's apple seated off. It's rounded, so that if I'm running a finger on here, I cannot tell when it transitioned from the primary bevel to the secondary bevel. This is a very common technique across historical swords of all types, especially if we're talking about like the medieval period. Peter Johnson has a great discussion looking at swords from Japan, looking at swords from Europe, looking at all sorts of different type of swords, and how their cross sections transition from their primary bevel to their final sharpening. And that's a very common technique where it's apple seated off in the secondary bevel portion to the final sharpness. The Hanwei Tinker instead has a, you can see it. It's a little bit difficult, but there is a slightly broader, I'd say, final secondary bevel than seen on the Kingston Arms, and it's again roughly 30 degrees or so. That coupled with the shallow secondary bevel means that this is a little bit sharper, although we'll see. I'm not sure how sharp that final edge is. It may, it's not cutting right now, so it probably needs a final strop or touch up to see if it'll do any cutting. Not particularly sharp right now, so it probably needs some touching up just because I've been doing too much test cutting with it. And then finally, our Kingston Arms, the sword that we're actually reviewing today, is a very very obtuse, greater than, well, not obtuse, but still very wide, greater than 40 degrees final edge angle, and that's what Skallagrim's having the difficulty cutting with. Now again, I don't remember having quite that much difficulty with it. I'll go ahead and do some test cutting now. Again, my bona fides aren't anything special. I've been collecting and cutting with swords for more than 20 years, but I'm not formally trained in the way that some of our favorite YouTubers are. I don't get to spend any time in the at a club training under Nick Thomas or Dave Rawlings. I have a background in traditional martial arts and Japanese styles, with some formal sword training from many years ago, but I don't consider myself anything more than really a backyard cutter in our, the current days. So here, let's go outside and just do a quick check with the sword. Starting with the easiest targets first, I'm going to use a light type of swing, trying to be very consistent across each target. The first cut didn't go through the carton, so I'm going to try and give it another go. It just sort of bent it the first time. Not very successful the second time either. It was actually a very clean cut. Fortunately, the mass of these gallon jugs helps keep the target in place when the sword is going through. First cut is very clean. Second cut, a little bit of tearing. This is a 20-ounce soda bottle, so a little bit thicker than a typical water bottle that's used for cutting. I just didn't have a water bottle. Went about halfway in and then scooped the rest of it out. I intentionally went for this heavier juice bottle. These are very difficult targets to cut. I wanted to see how the sword did against it. I actually cut a lot further than I was expecting. Cut almost all the way through, but 70% of the way through, and then it finally just tore. So that cut much more heavily than I was expecting into the very tough bottle. So now I've switched over to the LK10 Gin. You can see that with a sharp blade, it makes it much easier to go through the water bottle. Now I've switched back to the Kingston Arms Arming Sword, and now I'm using dry bamboo. So this is maybe a 1-inch thick knuckle. And unfortunately, I don't really bring the result over to the camera. I cut the short end of this particular branch. But it did cut all the way through, but it kind of shattered it, and the end was a little flaky. By comparison, using the Ming Jian, you can see it resulted in a much cleaner cut, even though it was a slightly thicker piece of bamboo. Well, that wasn't exactly as good a performance as I remember it. I really expected it to go pretty much straight through that first target with the milk carton, and it couldn't even do that very well. Now again, admittedly, I was intentionally doing a very easy type of cut where I was swinging mostly from my arm without engaging the hips very much, just to try and do consistency and not really just blast through the target. But I still expected to be able to get through just a standard, paper milk carton with it. And if it was a sharp edge, I'm sure it would have gone through easily. It made it through some of the jugs, the plastic jugs, okay. But the thicker plastic bottles, it just did not do. And you could see the comparison between the Jian and it, especially on the dry bamboo, it just couldn't do. Now again, there's a previous video that I have posted where I'm comparing different types of swords, cutting through green bamboo forest, and I did use the Kingston Arms Type 14, and it did chop through different stalks and different ages of bamboo in that case. So that's not to say that this sword cannot cut. It certainly can, but how much effort you have to use in order to get it cut in its current state, that's a good question. So I'm left more thinking that my original thoughts about it and my original memory was probably clouded, and I'm left to conclude that my version of it is probably very similar to what Skallagrim has, and that in its current design, it really leaves a lot to be desired as far as its ability to cut. Windless swords, deltin swords, several types of swords come in a blunt fashion that require sharpening before it's going to be able to do any type of cutting. This is not quite that bad. It does have an edge. It's just missing being sharp enough that you'll risk injuring yourself on it. But at the same point, the type of edge that's put on it is so wide as to it's really going to impact your ability to cut, especially the type of targets that most backyard cutters are interested in, which is a shame because there are many manufacturers out there that are perfectly capable of putting either no secondary edges on or very minute secondary edges on. The Japanese sword community that have wakizashi, tanto, katana, what have you, on the whole, if any Japanese sword released a sword with this type of edge on it, the community would cry and foam at the mouth and who knows what. Yet these type of edges seem to be not as uncommon when it comes to European sword manufacturers. I'm not sure if there's some type of a bias in there that's a holdover from earlier preconceptions as to what these swords were originally supposed to do or how they're supposed to look. It's getting better. There are more and more makers out there that are improving cross-section and geometry and final sharpness. And that's not to say that every sword needs to have a razor edge. There's plenty of evidence from historical examples where the edge doesn't have to be razor sharp. But this type of an edge, no. This is not going to be useful, even though it's robust and won't break on you. It's also impeding the ability for the sword to do the job that the rest of the blade geometry indicates it was used for. So I'm not sure. Maybe I'll take this as a project sword and reprofile it myself using a belt grinder and try and Appleseed it over and revisit it later and see if it can be improved upon. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents on it. Again, Skull, thanks for all the content that you point out, and hope that this helps the discussion. Take care.